In yesterday's video, we talked about the history of Robert House and the company he founded, Robco. While exploring one of his terminal sales centers, we discovered a hidden facility buried beneath the structure. This is the Robot Technology Facility. We came here in search of the mechanist, but the pre-war history that we find here will shock you. Let's continue our exploration of the secret Robot Technology Facility. As we head through, one of the first things we find is a series of laser tripwires. There are dozens of these, and they don't grant experience when you disarm them, so you really only get steel and fiber optics. It's a great source of fiber optics, but it is rather tedious. Thankfully, you can completely skip these if you want. If you accidentally trigger the tripwires, you activate 4 turrets aimed right at you.
Intruder alert, contamination.
Alternatively, you can bypass this laser grid completely by going through a crumbling hole in the wall, which leads you to the security office. Here we find the security office terminal. We learned that whatever was going on in this facility was incredibly hush-hush. All personnel had to be decontaminated when entering and exiting the facility. Before they could enter, they had to display a security badge with a photo ID, and those who did not were immediately apprehended and locked up before being questioned. Any guests had to have a signed letter of approval from General Rawlings and some other employee point of contact. Guests had to be accompanied at all times, and if they were ever caught unattended, they were apprehended and questioned. Since guests have to get approval from a man named General Rawlings, we can assume that the military was somehow involved with what was going on here. This facility had a staggering 219 different security protocols. However, after the bombs dropped, most of them have become corrupted, leaving only 4 that we can read. The first is a Class 5 counter-espionage procedure. If the facility administrator suspects that security has been breached by some foreign intelligence, like the Communist Chinese, the administrator will activate the Class 5 counter-espionage procedure. The procedure looked like this. The facility would enter a minimal security lockdown. All staff were to report to their stations to await further instruction, and anyone failing to report to their workstations in a timely manner or to be found absent would be considered a suspect and shot on sight. Shot on sight. These guys weren't messing around. Facility security would then escort members from each department to the research labs for processing. They would then use a Mesmatron-equipped Robobrain to interrogate each employee. A Mesmatron-equipped Robobrain? Savvy viewers will remember the Mesmatron from Fallout 3. The Mesmatron had a central role in the Paradise Falls line of quests, where you had to use it to enslave people. The Mesmatron would render subjects unable to respond, and they were highly susceptible to suggestion. The Mesmatron also had a 20% chance to explode a person's head when you used it. Back to Fallout 4, remember when I did my video on Hallucigen? In one of the last terminals we found there, Hallucigen was working on a crowd control device called a suppressor, which was supposed to temporarily paralyze people in large crowds. However, the paralysis was permanent, and the CEO of Hallucigen was very disappointed in the lead designer for the suppressor, who was also the lead engineer for the Mesmatron. So the lead engineer for the Mesmatron went to work for Hallucigen, and either before or after that event worked with the United States military to put Mesmatrons on all of the Robobrains. We see the effect of this weapon in the game. When a Robobrain attacks you with that big glowing circle that flies through the air, that is the Mesmatron equipped to the Robobrain. It makes your screen go black for a short period of time. That's really the only effect that the player suffers. They admit that due to the experimental nature of this technology, we should expect some casualties due to spontaneous cranial eruption. They estimate between 10 to 15% of the people interviewed would have their brains spontaneously explode, which is a 5 to 10% improvement from the Fallout 3 version of the Mesmatron. After the interrogation, should any secret agents be discovered, security is authorized to subdue them and turn them over to the research staff for experimentation. we're wading into some serious Orwellian stuff here. If these guys even suspected that there was a breach of security, they would interrogate their own employees with potentially lethal interrogation tactics to try to find the mole. And then if they did find any moles, they would kidnap them and experiment on them. But that's only one of the 4 recovered protocols. The next is the Gamma 9 security alert. The facility administrator is to activate a Gamma 9 security alert if there's any coordinated escape attempt by the facility's test subjects. In this case, the administrator will initiate a maximum security lockdown of the research wing and a minimal security lockdown elsewhere. At maximum security, the research wing's security defenses will activate, including all turrets and all robots, and they shut down all terminals that have any functions. In what is perhaps most twisted about this, whoever wrote this protocol suggested that the facility administrator use this event as a field test opportunity to deploy any experimental robots to see how they function. They expect casualties among the test subjects, even those who didn't try to escape, and if necessary, the administrator has the freedom to completely purge all test subjects. After the incident, security teams will methodically sweep the research wing before issuing an all clear. Afterwards, if they had to purge any of the test subjects, the administrator is free to request more. Oh my gosh. So from this protocol, we learn that whatever is going on in this facility includes detaining live human test subjects who still have free will and might try to escape. The next protocol is Epsilon 6. This one is in place in case there's a massive uprising of the robot janitorial staff. This is interesting. Did pre-war humanity have a problem with robots rebelling? Robot janitors are typically protectrons, right? Why would protectrons rebel? I thought everyone was pretty pleased with protectrons and thought that they were a pretty stable type of robot. It could also be that they're simply preparing for something that might happen, and that it's never happened before and would be extremely unlikely. If the janitorial robot staff were to rebel, all facility defense systems would activate, all remote terminal functions would be disabled, and the entire control center would be locked down. However, we learned something interesting. The protocol says, as a failsafe, if the control center has been compromised, a limited manual override can be initiated from the elevator access terminal in Security Room 3. Voice print identification of supervisor-level employees is required to activate the override. Now, we're in Security Room 3 right now, reading this terminal, and sure enough, there's an elevator right next to this terminal. So let's bear this in mind. The final protocol is the Omega Protocol. This one exists in the event of a confirmed nuclear detonation. The administrator will issue a temporary lockdown and all staff will shelter in place. After 12 hours, the administrator will try to re-establish contact with the military. If contact cannot be re-established within 24 hours, the administrator will order an orderly shutdown of the facility. Test subjects are to be secured in their cells. Employees are to remain on site and delete any sensitive files and records. After 30 hours, if they have not received any contact from the military, the administrator will activate Lockdown Omega Mode. This gives employees 10 minutes to evacuate the facility. Once initiated, the lockdown can only be terminated via remote authorization from the Military Robotics Oversight Committee. Now, these terminals tell us a whole lot. Let's orient ourselves here. We learned that this facility is not necessarily a Robco facility. It's under the Robco Sales and Service Center, but it's operated by the military. This facility is doing some sort of research about military robots, and for some reason they have a whole lot of people incarcerated in cells. They are likely performing experiments on these people, but we don't know what these experiments are. We also learned that of these 4 protocols, the one that was actually activated was Security Protocol Epsilon 6. On all of the terminals in this facility, we see the text, "An Epsilon 6 security alert has been declared. All systems have been locked down. Secure your stations and await further instruction." Strangely enough, this is the protocol that would only be activated in case of a mass uprising of robot janitors. This means that before the bombs dropped, because otherwise the Omega Protocol would have been activated, that the robot janitors of this facility rebelled, and the pre-war inhabitants never recovered before the bombs dropped. Security and defense systems will activate, remote terminal functions will be disabled, and the control center will be locked down. Employees were to stay and shelter themselves in place where they would wait for 10 business days for the Military Robotics Oversight Committee to contact them. Of all of the emergency protocols, this is the last one I expected to be used. Now, here in Security Station 3, we find an elevator with a terminal next to it. After unlocking this terminal, we learned that this elevator goes directly to the control center. In order to get it to work, we have to initiate a manual override, but that requires the voice authentication of management-level employees. So to get this to work, we need to explore the rest of the facility. Now, there are plenty of hostile robots in this facility, but all of these come from the Mechanist. Indeed, the Mechanist sends an iBot to you to taunt you before attacking you with a group of more robots. So I don't think any of these robots have anything to do with the Epsilon 6 security protocol. However, there are likely other security defenses that do. After using Ada to unlock the next security door, we can delve deeper into the facility to encounter even more robots. The next terminal we come upon is the production terminal. This was manned by a man named Lieutenant Justin Green. Here we learned that the United States military completely removed the facility from private control. The previous administrator of this facility was an employee from the General Atomics Company. Under his tenure, the department efficiency was at 90%. This was too low for Lieutenant Justin Green, who fired the administrator from General Atomics and over the course of many weeks replaced every single private sector civilian working here with a military employee. Lieutenant Green has very little good to say about the private sector. In his world, the public sector and the government does work better. He calls all of the General Atomics employees lazy. He also mocks a General Atomics employee named Sarah. General Atomics was proud of her work, but Lieutenant Justin Green caught her asking a Robobrain if it could feel pain and if it was sad. He fired her on the spot. After firing all of the private sector employees, according to his final entry, Justin Green got productivity to 100%, which of course is ridiculous and impossible. But we walk away learning some important things. Number one, all private sector employees were fired. That means that this facility was completely run by the military. And the second is that they had Robobrain heads here. We already know that this facility was important for military robotics and that they had a whole bunch of prisoners here. And now we learn that they had Robobrains here. This story just took a very dark turn. In the quality control section, we find our first holotape, the lead engineer's holotape.
Lead engineer, Thomas Harkin. So far, we're tracking on schedule for the latest Robobrain milestone. Dr. Asante has assured me that the active time between memory wipes has been greatly increased. Hopefully, that will hold true in our latest live testing. The senior engineers also informed me that their latest assembly line adjustments have been completed early. I can only hope that means due diligence was still paid, and we're not going to be looking at a total system breakdown again. Other than that, I'm still worried about the test subjects. Right now, we've got more than enough to meet our demand. But it's not like these things grow on trees.
These things? Is he talking about people? Test subjects? Of course they don't grow on trees. It's clear from this that this facility is creating Robobrains. They have an assembly line set up to do just that, but it takes a lot of work to create a Robobrain, as we learn from the chief engineer's terminal. In one instance, they had one of the brains react to the sulfuric acid runoff that came from a dome polishing compound they used when creating the Robobrain chassis. The subject's brain that they used turned a mottled brown color and started to break down only after 12 hours. They had to throw it away. We also learned that they originally thought of placing the entire brain and spinal cord into the Robobrain instead of just the brain. However, the scientists had a hard time maintaining the cohesion between the neural interface and the spinal column nerve endings. Basically, the nerves in the spinal column would reject the connections to the Robobrain chassis. Because of this rejection, they reverted, quote, to the good old brain-in-jar prototype. The brain-in-jar method would cut production time by 1/3. The first batch of Robobrains that they created were a mess, according to this terminal. They came back with cracked domes, thrown threads, overloaded fusion piles, fried circuits, but most troublingly, the Robobrains would not follow commands correctly. The chief engineer says that the Robobrains are misinterpreting commands. He says that the onboard brain seems to overthink its orders and that it almost decides how it wants to interpret those orders. Most of the time, the chief engineer says this results in, quote, property damage and even a few civilian fatalities. So it looks like the issue with Jezebel was not a fluke. Remember, we are here because Jezebel said that she interpreted the Mechanist's order to help the Commonwealth to really mean to kill all of the people of the Commonwealth. In Jezebel's mind, that was the best way to help them. And it looks like this might be a defect of Robobrains in general. And finally, despite the praise that the lieutenant gave all of the public sector employees working here, it looks like some of them like to goof off. One of the employees programmed a Robobrain to always speak in reverse. It ended up costing 8 hours of the chief engineer's time while he tried to diagnose the problem. I wonder what other tomfoolery the employees of this facility engaged in. Using Ada to unlock the doors brings us to the facilities wing. The first terminal we find is in Power Substation A. Here we learn of a man named Brandon McDaniel who managed this power substation. He wasn't happy working here. He spent 4 years getting a degree in electrical engineering, and he can strip down a Mr. Handy or a Protectron to its bare parts in just 2 hours, and yet they stick him here in Power Substation A. What a waste of time, he says. And so he comes up with, to quote Baldrick, a cunning plan. He works with a civilian friend of his who has access to cigarette vending machines to place one near his own workstation. His strategy is not only to make money off of selling the cigarettes, but also to attract all of the beautiful women working here to hang out near his office. It all seems to go according to plan until a man named Banks, who works over in Substation B, complained about all of the smoke. Brandon thinks that he's likely just jealous that all of the women are now hanging out in Substation A instead of his Substation B. He also tried to extort money out of Brandon by saying, look, I won't lodge a formal complaint if you make it worth my time. Instead of paying the extortion price, Brandon went right to his superior. He went directly to the general himself and gave the general free cigarettes. He then got permission to keep the cigarette dispenser in his workstation, and now there's nothing Banks can do about it. A little bit of petty drama in pre-war America played out in this underground Robobrain production facility. Continuing along and then up the stairs to facilities management, it's here we learned that the facility was not just creating Robobrains. We find repair orders for a variety of different robots. A Protectron was suffering from voice distortion. A Mr. Gutsy couldn't see out of its center eye stalk. And another Protectron lost a leg in an assembly accident. This helps explain all of the industrial assembly lines that we have found so far. We haven't found a lot of Robobrain treads, but we sure have found a lot of ruined Protectrons. It looks like the military took over this entire facility not just to produce Robobrains, but also to produce other military robots like Mr. Gutsy's. Next to this terminal, we find the second holotape, Facilities Director's holotape.
Tony Delano, Facilities. Air filtration's on the fritz again. It's like a constant haze in here. I swear to God, if these people don't quit smoking, I'm gonna sue for health benefits. Yeah, like anyone here would allow that to happen. Anyway, I got McDaniel up there taking a look. But if that fan needs replacing again, I'm having Fadley fired. I don't care if he is some hotshot's kid. He can't do this job. And I'm the one that's got to answer to Rawlings.
This is a nice bit of continuity to the terminal we found in Substation A. Looks like Tony Delano was suffering from all of the smoke that all of the employees were producing now that there was a cigarette vending machine in Substation A. He can't do anything about it because Brandon went directly to General Rawlings himself. Continuing along, Ada will unlock 2 more doors, and disturbingly we find our first cage. We are now entering the research wing of the facility. There's a forfeitures office. Apparently these are items that were confiscated from people visiting the facility. And inside the locked door we find quite a haul indeed. Gold, ammunition, missiles, weapons, chems. It is quite a haul. Just outside is the watch station terminal. The owner of this terminal was a man named G.C. Broderick, U.S. Army Military Police Division. This man is really disturbed with what he sees going on here. He says, I don't know what what these men and women did to deserve being sent here, but since they were transferred from civilian penitentiaries, I can only assume that they are the worst society has to offer. I don't think these people have any idea what's about to happen to them. These prisoners would have been better off serving their time elsewhere. And then he records some of the rumors that he's been hearing. He heard that the prisoners were having their brains cut out of their heads. This greatly disturbs him. He says, I knew that we were running experiments on these inmates. That's pretty intense, but I didn't know that we were literally cutting them open. He says, I joined the military because I wanted to serve my country and protect my fellow Americans. But now he's helping cut the brains out of inmates? We then learned that the prisoners were talking about rioting. Broderick says that if this is true, he really can't blame them. If the military is really dissecting these people, cutting them up and using their parts for robots, then maybe their riot is justified. One of his co-workers suggested that he activate the Gamma 9 security protocol, but instead, Broderick went straight to General Rawlings himself. Criminals or not, he says, these experiments are wrong and they need to be stopped before it's too late. The next terminal is from someone named Raymond Esteban. We learned that Broderick got reassigned out of the facility. He's now scrubbing toilets in some backwater listening post in Anchorage. Esteban is now in charge of this cell block, and he initiated Security Protocol Gamma 9. After 2 days, the threat of rioting ended and everything went back to normal. He justifies this action by saying, look, if we have any hope of beating the enemy at their own game, we need to get these robots online. Who cares what happens to a few lousy inmates? He says that he's sad that Broderick didn't fall in line, but at the end of the day, he expected Broderick to understand that, quote, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, end quote. With this information, it's official. The United States military is using prison inmates as the source of the brains that they are putting in Robobrain chassis. In order to quell the prisoner rebellion, Esteban activated Security Protocol Gamma 9. Remember, we read about that earlier. This is the one that shut down the entire research wing of the facility. And it's the one where the administrator used the opportunity to test out experimental robots on the test subjects. It's likely that when they did this, there were many inmate casualties, which helped quell the rebellion, putting the inmates back in line. Heading out of this room into Holding Block A, we find the very cells where the inmates were stored. In some of them, we find skeletons. In others, we find dead feral ghouls. And in even others, we find living feral ghouls.
Got it.
We've got company.
The military activated Security Protocol Epsilon 6 because the janitor robots rebelled. This locked down all of the inmates' cells. But before the military could lift the lockdown, the bombs dropped, ushering in the end of the world. The Military Robotics Oversight Committee was supposed to lift this lockdown after 10 days, but that committee was gone. The world was over. There was no one left to lift that lockdown. So these prisoners died in their cells. The lucky ones died within a few days or weeks without food and water. The unlucky ones absorbed radiation and became feral ghouls, where they either died of natural causes or where they stayed for 200 years until you show up and release them. At the top, we find the Medical Observation Terminal. Here we learn a little bit about the inmates that were imprisoned here. A22, a 34-year-old male, was convicted of serial killings in the DC area. A53, a 48-year-old female, was convicted for arson. She burned down a courthouse, leaving 3 dead. They're actually going to incinerate her. She has a family history of dementia, so they don't think that her brain is a good fit. A57, a 22-year-old female, was convicted for murdering a waitress. She's prone to sudden outbursts of violence and is highly emotional. She's on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication. A72 is a 32-year-old male convicted of second-degree murder while under the influence of alcohol. This one exhibits high intelligence and knowledge of tactics. Probably an ex-military individual, shows signs of PTSD, as is subject A88, a 33-year-old female. Ex-military convicted of second-degree manslaughter. The assault resulted in the hospitalization and later death of the victim. Even so, she's still highly intelligent and mentally sound. The people they thought were good fits, they allowed to rot in these cells. And those that were not, instead of sending them back to prison, they incinerated them. The sources of all of the brains were from convicts, some of whom were on antipsychotic medication. Many others showed signs of PTSD. Some of these people were legitimately monsters, murdering waitresses, burning down courthouses. Others simply made horrible mistakes, like accidentally killing somebody while drunk. And yet all of them were incarcerated, drugged, interrogated, tortured, had their skulls cut open, their spinal cords severed, their memories wiped, their personalities drowned, and then their brains reprogrammed and placed in Robobrain chassis. This will be a hard and bitter pill to swallow the next time I sit down to create a Robobrain at my robot workstation. From here, we take an elevator to the research labs. The research lab is a big circle, and if we start from the right, we first explore the cerebral reconditioning room. In the cerebral reconditioning room, we find the brain extraction terminal, which I think must be out of place. The scientist explains that they're getting backed up. The brain extractors were never meant to operate at this capacity. The extractors have been running around the clock for the last several weeks. They're encountering some technical difficulties. They're getting popped blades from slicing through a particularly tough skull, or they get seized hydraulics in the brain pulling arms when the spinal cord hasn't been properly severed from the brain. Remember when we found a complaint earlier from someone who wasted 8 hours trying to diagnose a problem, only to discover that some employee had programmed a Robobrain to speak backwards? Well, here we find more evidence that the employees here at this facility goofed off a lot. The employees in the brain extraction wing mixed biogel with grenadine and vodka and dared each other to drink it. They actually thought it was pretty tasty, and they named this drink the Extractor Sunrise. In the next entry, we learned that one of the members had a birthday party, so they made him a brain-shaped cake. Only it wasn't a cake. They just took frosting and smeared it on one of the extracted brains. They then gave the brain to the birthday boy to bite into, and they said the look on his face when he bit down into the slice we gave him was pretty hilarious. Yeah, it was the waste of a decent subject brain, but the prank was totally worth it. We have some really good times down here. These guys sound like pure sociopaths. They can't understand why someone would feel uncomfortable doing this job, as we learn in the final terminal entry. One employee in sanitation said that it felt wrong to incinerate the bodies after the brains have been extracted. Someone else asked this guy if it ever bothered him to pull the brain out of an unwilling subject. This guy, the guy who puts icing on a brain and gives it to a coworker as if it was cake, says, "No, it doesn't bother me. I don't know why some of these people are having problems with what they're doing. Maybe they should look for work somewhere else." Looks to me like the military hired exactly the right personalities for these tough jobs. It takes a callous human being to pull the brain out of a human being, cover it with icing, cut it up, throw it away, and then get drunk off of biogel spiked with grenadine and vodka. The next room is called the Brain Extraction Room. In here, we find actual brains in jars, but we find the Cerebral Reconditioning Terminal. This is why I said earlier that I think the terminals were in the wrong place. I think this terminal needs to be in the Cerebral Reconditioning Room, and the Brain Extraction Terminal that we just read is rather supposed to be in the Brain Extraction Room, this room. Next to the Cerebral Reconditioning Terminal, we find our third holotape, the Chief Scientist's holotape.
Anise Ciroletti, Chief Scientist. This is the third time I've had to request more security. As thorough as our assembly procedures may be, there's a human factor to be considered. These are criminal and unstable minds. It can't be a scientist's job to ensure each test subject is properly sedated. I was promised military assistance and security, but we need more. I won't allow my crew to be endangered. Fascinating as it may be to integrate the human mind with robotics, sometimes I wish I never signed on to this project.
And what a surprise, these inmates don't want their brains removed from their bodies. Who would have thought? Poor Ciroletti is having just the darndest time pulling these brains out of living human beings. The stupid military just isn't giving her and her team enough security. We can read her terminal to find transcripts of some of these cerebral reconditioning events. These are extremely disturbing. I'll read them word for word. Hello? Can you understand me? What? Who is that? Where are you? I can't see. Oh my God, what have you people done to me? Calm down, calm down. I can't feel my body. I can't feel anything. What's going on? Please, this is horrible. A22, if you don't calm down, I'll have to turn you off. Turn me off? You mean kill me? For the love of God, tell me what the hell you've done. Terminating A22. Subject 2 unstable. A22 was the 34-year-old man who was a serial killer. They ended up just killing him. Next up is A57. A57 is the 22-year-old female who killed a waitress. She's currently on a cocktail of antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication. You are designated Unit A57. Understood? Yes. A57 ready to accept commands. Excellent. A57, initiate command Diagnostic Zeta. Understood. 2 minutes pass. This is taking too long. Please respond. Error. No command was provided and awaiting unit designation. Damn it. This person was dumped in the furnace because her short-term memory was, quote, shot to hell. The brain forgot commands that she had been given by Ciriletti. The next is A110, a 30-year-old female. All right, do you have any memories before your service at this facility? Negative, ma'am. Are you certain? Do a deep scan of your memory banks. It's been reported that you are acting irregularly. Scanning now. Please, stand by. Error. Unknown fragment detected. What? This can't be real. My arms, my legs, they're gone. What's wrong with me? Switching off. Ciriletti then powers the unit down. She calls in a tech to clean out long-term memory of this brain. Before they can be used as Robobrains, their memories have to be wiped. The final one is most disturbing. This is A124, age 36, gender male. Recording now, repeat that again. I said that if you don't put me back in my body, I'm going to kill you, then everyone else in this place. Interesting. You do realize that you're simply a brain attached to a vocal interface, that you don't have the capability to perform those actions. I don't care. I'll find a way, and when I do, you'll be the first to die. Wonderful, simply wonderful. The lack of your original body doesn't disturb you? No, it doesn't matter. Whatever it takes, I'll end all of you. Switching off. Excellent. As soon as we flush the long and short term, this one will be ready. Recommend sending it to Rawlings' tactical team as soon as it's fitted in a chassis. The reason that one was most disturbing is because Ciriletti got excited when the brain exhibited signs of violence. She went and had the memory wiped on that brain, and then she says that she's going to put it in a chassis and then assign that Robobrain to General Rawlings' tactical team. This is what she was looking for in a good subject? This brain was a success? The next room is the Robobrain R&D room. Research and Development. And it's here that we make a few startling discoveries. On the wall are X-rays of a death claw. A death claw. This is a pre-war facility making Robobrains. Pre-war. And there's a death claw? X-rays of a death claw? How did this pre-war group of scientists know about the death claw before the bombs dropped? Well, this must be the X-ray of an earlier form of the death claw. The Deathclaw was originally manufactured by the United States government from the Jackson Chameleon, with the original idea to replace human troops in battle. So the existence of these X-rays are not lore-breaking. Deathclaws did exist before the war, and the military did make them. It was the Master who then exposed them to the FEV virus much later, after the bombs dropped, which made the Deathclaws that we know of today. But what I can't explain is why in one of these jars we find a super mutant head. What? A super mutant head? It's even wearing a super mutant helmet. This is problematic because there are only 3 known sources of super mutants. On the West Coast, the Master first made super mutants at the Mariposa military base in 2102. He made them by exposing humans to the FEV virus. On the East Coast, the Capital Wasteland version of the super mutant was made by Vault-Tec in Vault 87. The third is the Commonwealth super mutant created by the Institute. The Institute kidnapped people from the Commonwealth and injected them with FEV, which turned them into super mutants. But all of this happened after the war. What is a super mutant head doing in a jar in a pre-war Robobrain production facility that's been locked for over 200 years? Now, I suppose it's possible that maybe the military had been talking with Vault Tech at Vault 87, and maybe Vault 87 had begun their experiments by injecting people with the FEV virus before the bombs dropped. Maybe they then produced one of the world's first super mutants and sent it here to the Robobrain facility so that the military could inspect it. I suppose that's possible, but it seems unlikely to me, as the research was not even supposed to begin until the bombs dropped. That's the whole point of the vaults. In this room, we also find a big vat filled with ghouls. This means that the United States military knew the effects of long-term radiation exposure, that it would turn people into feral ghouls. I guess they were experimenting with all three of these things at the same time that they were producing Robobrains. Now, part of me thinks that maybe this is just an oversight on Bethesda's part. Maybe they forgot that this was supposed to be a pre-war facility and that super mutants really shouldn't exist yet. But in one of the vats, they've got a stag head, but it's not a rad stag head. It's only one head. So they took the time to make sure that the stag head in this jar was lore friendly. It wasn't a mutated red stag, this was just a stag head. But they didn't take the time to make sure that there wasn't something not lore-friendly in any of the other vats, like, I don't know, a super mutant head. This tells me that all of this was intentional. Bethesda intentionally put a super mutant head in the jar, which means that the United States military knew that the FEV virus would turn people into super mutants before the war. But what's strange about this is that the head does have a helmet. How could the super mutant created by Vault Tech have fashioned a rudimentary helmet for itself before being killed and sent to the Robobrain lab? This just raises a whole lot of questions. Continuing along, we find ourselves at the incinerator. We find panels with 15 furnaces in each panel where they would incinerate the bodies of the inmates after their brains were extracted. We find human bones littering the ground in ash piles. And at the end of the room, there's a big vat of molten lava. Somehow, this has remained on fire for 200 years. On the Robobrain that attacked us, we find a key that opens up a door to let us out of here. We can use the key at the nearby Robobrain production terminal. Here, we can see the status of all of the different batches of Robobrains that this facility produced. And we learned that they only produced 5 batches. We don't, however, know how many Robobrains were in each batch. In batch 2, they improved the energy efficiency of the Robobrain with particular hardware updates and modifications. In batch 3, they updated the brain preservation fluids to try and maintain the longevity shown in batch 1. But in batch 3, they made some big mistakes, so in batch 4, they improved the visual cortex connections to remedy the failings in batch 3, where some of the Robobrains exhibited poor motor skill and spatial awareness. And batch 5 was in production when the bombs dropped. They were in the process of extracting brains from bodies. They had updated the hardware and the software to allow for smoother communication between the brain and the CPU. And they added tactical combat capabilities. This is the batch of Robobrains that the Mechanist found when he or she arrived at this facility, and this is the batch of Robobrains that we fight out in the wasteland. And now we're about to exit the Robobrain production facility and enter the control room where we face off against the Mechanist. But there's one more piece of pre-war lore that I need to cover before we do. However, the terminal is actually found in the Mechanist's lair. In a secret room in the back of the lair, we find a terminal called the Observation Terminal. In this terminal, we watch the relationship between the United States military and the General Atomics Company dissolve. In the first entry, we see some hope of the beginning of a healthy working relationship. 2 representatives from the General Atomics Company, Anna Karim and Gregory Alder, meet with General Rawlings to discuss the Robobrain project. The terminal says that it will be a challenge for the public sector to work with the private sector, but in this relationship, they see great promise. We see our first bumps in the road in the next terminal entry. As soon as the test subjects arrive, many of the General Atomics employees became uncomfortable. Military personnel didn't even flinch, but several of the Robco employees have had concerning verbal arguments. The military then puts 2 of the General Atomics employees on watch. We already know from a previous terminal that the entire General Atomics staff was removed from this facility pretty early on in the project's history. It looks like the private and public sector could not work together in this instance, and so the public sector, the military, took over. The lieutenant said that the military got a 100% efficiency rating, and I mentioned earlier that seemed a little bit incredulous, but we learned more about the steps that the military went to improve the work performance of their employees. In the final entry here, General Rawlings brought in another doctor named Kara Asante to act as competition. The general wanted other employees to feel like their jobs could be at risk. Because of this, one employee named Mr. Samuels has been much more compliant, but it did anger Gregory Adler. He was one of the General Atomics scientists who was first to work on this program. The military was remaking their team before their very eyes, and there was nothing the General Atomics staff could do about it. When Ada unlocks the final door, we enter a large control room where we come face to face with the Mechanist. This is the final fight of the dungeon, and it's also the end of all pre-war lore about this facility. So we're gonna save this epic battle for an upcoming video on the Mechanist. But before we end, we can skip this battle altogether. Once you have all of the holotapes that you found in the facility, head all the way back to Security Station 3. Remember, we found that elevator there with a terminal that was asking for voice recognition. To initiate the manual override, load each of the holotapes that you found in the facility one by one into the terminal until the terminal recognizes it.
This is the third time I've had to request more security.
Tony Delano, facilities.
Lead engineer, Thomas Harkin.
Once done, you're able to initiate the manual override and you can take the elevator down directly into Central Command where the Mechanist is. This way you don't have to fight any of the robots. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the full story of the Robobrain production facility. This is yet again another dark, sordid, and twisted chapter of pre-war American life. The United States government used this facility to create robots of all kinds and a new Robobrain. When General Atomics employees started to exhibit reservations about stripping the brains out of living human beings, they were all fired and replaced with government employees. Any government employees that objected to what was going on here were restationed in Alaska, where they scrubbed toilets for the rest of their lives. Prison inmates were shipped to this facility from all over the world. If this story is any indication, then it looks like the pre-war United States military could be just as inhuman as any of the pre-war companies. And that's not even the end. We still have to defeat the Mechanist. Never fear, ladies and gentlemen, we will complete this story soon. I'll be doing a video all about the Mechanist, whether or not it's moral to kill that person, and I'll show off the very end to this dungeon. So be sure to subscribe to get notified when I publish that video. But what are your thoughts on this Robobrain production facility? Does it get any darker than this in the world of Fallout 4? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. I read all of your comments and I use them as inspiration for my future videos. If you'd like to chat about this topic with other like-minded individuals in the Oxhorn Community Discord server, be sure to click that invitation link in the description below. And if you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Patreon subscribers get access to a private channel on my Discord server, as well as a bunch of other cool Oxhorn perks. But more than anything, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just so glad that you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early, with a brand new video.
Now drawing reserve power.
Sparks! You myself. Carbine robots.